Now we go for the next question. Myelin sheath producing cells of axon of CNS. The same question asked in the another way. Myelin sheath producing cells of CNS are. CNS means central nervous system. In the central nervous system, myelinated and non-myelinated axons are present. Now this one we call it as axon. The axon is covered and protected by myelin sheath. In the central nervous system, around the axon, the myelin is secreted by astrocyte, ependymal cells, microglia cells, oligodendrocytes, and the correct answer is the oligodendrocytes. That is the fourth option. Now go for the next question. Now we have to discuss the other questions regarding the muscle tissue, nervous tissue, etc. Now here the first question is, voluntary muscles differ from the cardiac muscles in having. Now here the question is voluntary muscles. The voluntary muscles are also called skeletal muscles or striped muscles or striated muscles. Voluntary muscles differ from cardiac muscles in having. One we call it as intercalated disc. Intercalated discs are present in the cardiac muscles. Indistinct sarcolemma, that is also present in the cardiac muscle. And the third one is many long nuclei, only in the voluntary muscles. Now as we observe the voluntary muscle, in the voluntary muscle, in each muscle cell, how many nuclei are present? Many nuclei are present. Now the fourth option is branched fibers. The branched fibers are also associated with cardiac muscle. Now you have to identify the correct answer for this question. Voluntary muscles differ from that of cardiac muscles in having. The answer is the third answer, that we call it as many long nuclei. Now we go for the next question. Sphincters are made up of. Now this is a small opening. It is guarded by a sphincter. Now where we have to identify the sphincters. For example, alimentary canal. In the alimentary canal, one we call it as pyloric sphincter. Now what are the muscles present in the sphincter? Now this one we call it as an opening. Around the opening, what is present? Sphincter. The sphincter is made by what type of muscles? Now one option we call it as smooth muscles. The second one we call it as striated muscles. The third one we call it as voluntary muscles. And the fourth one we call it as cardiac muscles. Generally, the sphincters are associated with visceral organs. In the visceral organs, what type of muscles are present? Smooth muscles, or involuntary, or unstriped or non-striated. Based on this information, you have to identify the answer for this question. Sphincters are made up of. The correct answer is the smooth muscles. Now we go for the next question. Assertion. Skeletal muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are also called muscle cells. The skeletal muscle fibers have very limited power of regeneration. 100% correct. Because skeletal muscle is having the less power of regeneration. In the skeletal muscles, what is the regenerative cell? That we call it as the satellite cell. Now here the given assertion is 100% correct. Now we have to identify the reason. A mature skeletal muscle cell contains a few undifferentiated cells called myeloblasts. Here myeloblasts are not undifferentiated, differentiated. So that you have to identify the answer for this question. The A assertion is true, but R is false. It means here in the reason what they gave, undifferentiated, but actually what type of myeloblast cells are present? Differentiated. So the R is wrong, the A is correct. The correct answer is third. Now we go for the next question. Stretch stimulus is involved in. Again repeated. Stretch stimulus is involved in. One we call it as the relaxation of muscles, contraction of muscles due to stretching, stretching of muscles due to contraction, and the failure of muscles to contract. Now here the student get a bit of inconvenience. Now this part we call it as the urinary bladder. UB means urinary bladder. On the dorsal side of urinary bladder, what are present? The stretch receptors. In the urinary bladder, what type of muscles are present? The smooth muscles are present. Whenever the urinary bladder is filled with urine, it enlarges. Automatically from the stretch receptors, the information goes to central nervous system with the help of the sensory nerves. Now the central nervous system analyzes this information and gives instructions to the muscles of urinary bladder with the help of motor nerves. So automatically the muscles present in the urinary bladder will undergo contraction. Now based on this information, you have to identify the correct answer for this question. Stretch stimulus is involved in. Now you have to identify the answer for this question is the second one. Contraction of muscles due to stretching. From the stretch receptors, information goes to central nervous system. The central nervous system gives instructions to urinary bladder. The muscles present in the urinary bladder will undergo contraction. So that what is the second answer for this question? The answer is second one. That is contraction of muscles due to stretching. Now go for the next question. Assertion. Cardiac muscle fiber is a functionally syncytium. Many students are having a doubt regarding this question. Regarding the muscle tissue, we know very well voluntary muscles. In the voluntary muscles, in each cell, many nuclei are present. Now, based on this character, the voluntary muscle is called structurally syncytium. But here we are discussing cardiac muscle fiber is a functionally syncytium according to Guyton. Now, the assertion is correct. How it is functionally syncytium? As we observe the cardiac muscle, from one cardiac muscle cell to another cardiac muscle cell, the heartbeat continuously passes, or there is a continuous ionic continuity. Once again it is repeated. As we observe the cardiac muscle, from one muscle cell to another muscle cell, there is a continuity of ions. What is the reason for the continuity of ions? One reason is the cells are branched in the form of a net. And the second one is intercalated discs. In the intercalated discs, what are present? Desmosomes. Because of the intercalated discs and branches from one cell to another cell, the ion continuously passes. Based on this, the cardiac muscle is functionally syncytium. In the cardiac muscle, always the heartbeat continuously passes. That is the continuity. That we call it as functionally syncytium. Now you have to identify the reason. Heart muscle fibers have reticular arrangement. Here the reticular arrangement means one cell having the fibers, another cell having the fibers. They are in the form of the net. That is called the reticular arrangement and intercalated disc. So that A and R are correct. RE explains A. Now what is the correct answer? The answer is 1. Now we go for the next question. The site of attachment tendon to a fixed bone is called. Now this one we call it as the voluntary muscle. In our body, voluntary muscles are present. The voluntary muscles are also called skeletal muscles. All skeletal muscles are voluntary muscles. They are attached to the bones of endoskeleton. Now, the voluntary muscle attached to movable bone. MB means movable bone. And NMB, that we call it as non-movable bone. Now, between voluntary muscle and movable bone, between voluntary muscle and non-movable bone, this one we call it as T means tendon. This one is tendon. It means in our body, all voluntary muscles attached to either movable bone or non-movable bone. Here we are asking what type of question? The site of attachment of tendon to a non-movable bone is called insertion of muscle, origin of muscle. Now here we are asking the non-movable bone. So the tendon between voluntary muscle and non-movable bone, that we call it as, the answer is origin. The connection between the voluntary muscle and movable bone, that we call it as insertion. Now the answer for this question is second one. Now we go for the next question. The following is with both striated and non-striated muscles. We are having a good idea regarding the digestive system of rabbit. In the digestive system, what we discussed, the mouth. The mouth opens into vestibule. Vestibule opens into buccal cavity. Buccal cavity opens into the pharynx. The pharynx opens into esophagus. The esophagus opens into stomach. No doubt, in the wall of alimentary canal, generally smooth muscles are present. The smooth muscles are also called unstriped or non-striated. Now here the asking question is, the following is with both striated and non-striated muscles. That means one option is urinary bladder. In the urinary bladder always smooth muscles. And the next one we call it as the skin. And the third one we call it as the stomach. In the stomach, what are present? The smooth muscles. And the last part we call it as esophagus. In the esophagus, in the anterior part one type, in the posterior part one type. This is the esophagus. In the anterior part one type of muscles, in the posterior part one type of muscle. So in the alimentary canal, name the part in which two kinds of muscles are present. That we call it as esophagus. The correct answer we call it as the fourth option. Now we go for the next question. Satellite cells are two voluntary muscles. Now again it is repeated. Satellite cells are two voluntary muscles. In the voluntary muscles, what are the regenerative cells? Satellite cells. In the smooth muscles, what are the regenerative cells? Pericytes. Now in the voluntary muscles, satellite cells are present. They are related to what type of cells of smooth muscles? Now you identify the question. Satellite cells are to voluntary muscles, whereas pericytes are to, one we call it as smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, somatic muscles, and Purkinje fibers. Now what is the correct answer for this question is the first option, that we call it as smooth muscles. Now we go for the next question. The distinct features or characters of cardiac muscle is, first you have to identify the options. Many nuclei, intercalated discs, stripes, and distinct sarcolemma. Now what is the distinct features? Once again repeated, what is the distinct feature? Now the options, many nuclei. Many nuclei are present in the cells of voluntary muscles. So the first answer is eliminated. What about the second one? Intercalated discs. And the third one we call it as stripes. And the fourth one we call it as distinct sarcolemma. Now you have to identify the correct answer for this question is, now here interrelated discs. A small mistake in the answer. Here the correct answer is intercalated discs. Now the student get one doubt. In the cardiac muscles also the stripes are present. But here in the question what they asked, what is the distinct character of cardiac muscle? Both are correct. Intercalated discs and stripes both are correct. But if they are given separately, then we go for the very important character, that we call it as the intercalated disc. Not interrelated, intercalated. So the correct answer is second one. Now we go for the next question. The muscle whose nucleus has a characteristic wavy outline and appears snake-like when contracted. Now, as we observe the smooth muscle, in the smooth muscle, the muscle cell is spindle shape or fusiform. Now, in the smooth muscle, in each muscle cell, what is present? Only one nucleus is present. Whenever the smooth muscle undergoes contraction, what is going to happen? Now the smooth muscle cell undergoes contraction, automatically the nucleus appears to be snake-like. Now the nucleus changes its shape. Now you have to identify the answer. The muscle whose nucleus has a characteristic wavy outline and appears snake-like when undergoes contraction. One is skeletal muscle, second one smooth muscle, third one cardiac, and all the above. Now based on this information, you have to guess the correct answer for this question is the second one, that we call it as the smooth muscle. Now we go for the next question. The muscle whose contraction is regulated by autonomous nervous system and hormones. Here generally the student going to commit a mistake. Voluntary muscles are always under the control of somatic nervous system, whereas the smooth muscles under the control of autonomous nervous system. Cardiac muscles under the control of autonomous nervous system and hormones. Here what is the hormone? Epinephrine. Name the muscles under the control of autonomous nervous system. Two answers. One we call it as smooth muscle, one we call it as cardiac muscle. But here the question is the muscle whose contraction is regulated by both autonomous nervous system and hormones. One we call it as skeletal, cardiac, smooth, and fourth option 1 and 2. Now what is the correct one? The second option, that is the cardiac muscle. Now we go for the next one. Identify non-visceral smooth muscles from the following. Again I am giving the information for this question. As we observe the second type of muscle, that we call it as smooth muscle. The smooth muscles not only present in the visceral organs but also present in the non-visceral organs, that is the ciliary body present in the eye and iris, and next erector pili muscles of the skin. Now identify non-visceral smooth muscles from the following. First option, iris muscles around the pupil of the eye, muscles present in the wall of alimentary canal, muscles present in the wall of urinary bladder, muscles of the tongue. Now based on this information, what is the correct answer is the first answer, that is iris muscle around the pupil of the eye. Now go for the next question. The resting macrophages. Now as we observe the glial cells of nervous system, one we call it as oligodendrocytes, second one astrocytes, third one ependymal cells, and the fourth one is the microglial cells. The microglial cells generally they are at rest. Whenever the nervous system gets infection, the microglial cells become activated. They perform the phagocytosis and ultimately provides protection to the nervous system. Now here you have to identify the question. The resting macrophages are, one we call it as neutrophils, that is a type of blood cells, eliminated. Monocytes, a type of WBC, eliminated. Microglial cells, they are the resting macrophages. Now what is the correct answer for this question is the third option, that we call it as microglial cells. Now move for the next question. Synapse is a wide gap present between. Now this is one neuron. These are called dendrites or dendrons. This is called cell body. This is called axon. These are called teledendrons. Now it is a gap. Now these are dendrons. This is cell body or cyton, and this is axon. Teledendrons, again a gap. Dendrons, cyton, axon, teledendrons, and a gap. Dendrons and cyton, so on. Now you identify the question. Synapse is a wide gap present between axon of a neuron and dendrite of another neuron. Second option, axons of two neurons, dendrites of two neurons, two cytons of two nerve cells. Now here what is the answer? Now teledendrons of one axon and dendrons of another axon, what is present? A structural functional wide gap is present, that is called the synapse. Now the answer is the first option. Go for the next question. Arrange the following correct sequence during the transmission of nerve impulse. Again repeating the question. Arrange the following in correct sequence during the transmission of nerve impulse. One we call it as efferent neuron. The second one we call it as eye. and the next one we call it as interneuron, and the next one we call it as muscle. Here one option is absent, that we call it as E, that is called efferent, that is called efferent neuron. Now I am repeating: A, efferent neuron; B, eye; C, interneuron; D, muscle, and the E is efferent neuron. Now as we observe, this part we call it as the eye. That means it is the sense organ. From the sense organ, the information is received by efferent neuron. From the efferent neuron, the information goes to interneuron. Then it goes to efferent neuron. Then it goes to the effector known as muscle. Now you have to identify the correct answer. The answer is 3. That means first eye, it is a sense organ. From the sense organ, the sensory information received by efferent neuron. Then it is received by interneuron. Then it is received by efferent neuron. Then it goes to effector. Here the effector is the muscle. Now we go for the next question. Pseudo-unipolar neurons occur in. Pseudo-unipolar neurons occur in. As we observe the transverse section of spinal cord. Now as we observe the transverse section of spinal cord, this is the central canal, and these are the dorsal roots, and these are the ventral roots. As we observe the transverse section of spinal cord, in the dorsal root what is present? Ganglion. In this ganglion, what type of neuron present? Unipolar neuron. But here the unipolar neuron is called pseudo-unipolar because this is the cyton. From the cyton, a single process arises. This divides into 2 branches. One branch goes to central nervous system, one branch goes to peripheral nervous system. It means in the pseudo-unipolar neuron, the 2 branches arises as a single process from the cyton. So here the unipolar neuron is called pseudo-unipolar neuron. Where we find the pseudo-unipolar neuron? In the ganglia of dorsal root of spinal cord. Now you have to identify the options. Retina of eye, dorsal root of cranial nerve, third one is brain, and the fourth one we call it as dorsal root ganglia of the spinal nerve. The correct answer is the fourth option. Now we go for the next question. Arrange the following sequence according to the direction of flow of impulse across the synapse. Again it is repeating. Arrange the following in a order according to the direction of flow of impulse or propagation across the synapse. One option is postsynaptic membrane and synaptic cleft, presynaptic membrane and synaptic knob. Now as we observe the diagram, now this one we call it as the presynaptic neuron, and this one we call it as the synapse, and this one we call it as the postsynaptic neuron. The membrane present in the presynaptic neuron, that is the presynaptic membrane. The membrane associated with postsynaptic neuron, that we call it as the postsynaptic membrane. How the nerve impulse propagation passes? First of all, the dendrons, cyton, axon, teledendrons of presynaptic neuron, synapse, dendrons, cyton, axon, teledendrons of postsynaptic neuron, and goes on. Here regarding the options, what is the correct order of passing of propagation? Postsynaptic membrane, synaptic cleft, and next presynaptic membrane, synaptic knob. Now here as we observe the presynaptic membrane, synaptic knob, the synaptic knob followed by presynaptic membrane, followed by synaptic cleft, followed by postsynaptic membrane. Now what is the correct answer for this question? You have to identify. For this question is based on this information is the answer is 1. Now here the D, synaptic knob. From the synaptic knob goes to presynaptic membrane, then goes to synaptic cleft, then goes to postsynaptic membrane. Now go for the next question. Membrane of axon is called. Now this one we call it as cell body or cyton. These are called the dendrons, and this is called axon hillock. From the axon hillock what will arise? The axon. Always its number is 1. The axon is covered and protected by plasma lemma. That plasma lemma technically known as axolemma. In myelinated axons, above axolemma what is present? Neurilemma or myelin sheath is present. Here, what is the membrane? That means plasma membrane. What is the plasma membrane of axon is called? One we call it as neurilemma, second one myelin sheath, third one Shavanti sheath, the fourth one is axolemma. Now you have to identify here the membrane, that is the neurilemma. What is the correct answer for this question is the first one. Sorry, the fourth option, that is axolemma. Axolemma, the plasma membrane is called axolemma. Now go for the next question. Oligodendrocytes, astrocytes, ependymal cells are derived from. Now regarding this question, what is the information? As we observe the nervous tissue, in the nervous tissue all components are derived from ectoderm. But one exception is present, that is called microglial cells. The microglial cells are derived from mesoderm. Here the question is oligodendrocytes, astrocytes, ependymal cells are derived from ectoderm, endoderm, perineurium, pericardium. Now what is the correct answer? The answer is ectoderm, that is the first option. Now we go for the next question. Loose connective tissue sheath around fasciculus of a nerve. Now as we observe this one, we call it as axon. The axon is also called the nerve fiber. As we observe the transverse section of a nerve, the nerve is made by nerve fibers. In the transverse section, as we observe, the nerve fibers are arranged in the form of bundles. Now this is one nerve fiber. The nerve fiber is also called axon. The bundle of nerve fibers we call it as fasciculus. This is another fasciculus. This is another fasciculus. Here what is the question? The loose connective tissue sheath around the fasciculus of a nerve is called. One is epineurium, and the second one we call it as endoneurium, and the third one we call it as perineurium, and the fourth one we call it as pericardium. Now as we observe the nerve fiber is covered and protected by a connective tissue sheath called endoneurium. The bundle of muscle fibers we call it as fasciculus, covered and protected by perineurium. All fascicles covered and protected by a connective tissue sheath called epineurium. Now you have to identify the answer for this question is, the answer is the second one, that we call it as, if the nerve fiber loose connective tissue sheath around the fasciculus of a nerve, if it is nerve fiber, the answer is endoneurium. If it is bundle of nerve fibers, the answer is perineurium. Now we go for the next question. Now we have to discuss the remaining questions. Cartilage present in the intervertebral discs. Now as we observe the varieties of cartilage, the last one we call it as the fibrous cartilage. The fibrous cartilage present in the intervertebral discs and pubic symphysis. Now cartilage present in the intervertebral disc, one we call it as elastic, second one we call it as hyaline, third one we call it as fibrous, and the last one is with perichondrium. Now what is the correct answer for this question regarding the intervertebral disc? The correct answer is the fibrous cartilage, that is the third option. Go for the next question. cartilage with yellow elastic fibers. As we observe the cartilages, the first one is hyaline cartilage. In the hyaline cartilage, only delicate collagen fibers. What about the elastic cartilage? In the elastic cartilage, collagen fibers and yellow elastin fibers are present. What about the third cartilage, the fibrous cartilage? In the fibrous cartilage, only collagen fibers. Here, what is the asking question? Cartilage with yellow elastic fibers is seen in. One we call it as trachea and bronchi. Second one we call it as eustachian tube. And the third one we call it as pubic symphysis. And the fourth one we call it as the tip of the nose. In the tip of the nose, what is present? Hyaline cartilage. In the pubic symphysis, fibrous cartilage. In the trachea and bronchi, hyaline cartilage. Whereas in the eustachian tubes, between tympanum and pharynx, what is present? Eustachian tube. Such eustachian tube is made by what type of cartilage? That is elastic cartilage. Such elastic cartilage having what type of fibers? Yellow elastin fibers. Now the answer is the second one. Now we go for the next question. The following are the statements about the grizzle. Now first of all, you have to identify what is meant by grizzle. It is nothing but the cartilage. Now you have to study the statements, then we are getting the correct answer. The cartilage is also called the grizzle. The first option, it is a semi-rigid and somewhat flexible supportive tissue which can withstand compression and deformation of forces that act on it. The entire cartilage, the cartilage bears the weight of the body. The bony tissue bears the weight of the body. So the first option, the cartilage, no doubt it is semi-rigid. Now the second one, cartilage gets or draws. The cartilage gets or draws nourishment from the perichondrium. No doubt, as we observe the cartilage, the matrix is non-vesicular. The perichondrium is vesicular. From the perichondrium, the matrix of cartilage draws or gets the nourishment. That is correct. Now the third one, lacunae. What is meant by lacunae? That is the empty space. The lacunae present in the matrix encloses osteoblast. But we are asking regarding the cartilage. Regarding the cartilage, what type of cells are present? Chondroblast, but not osteoblast. So the third statement is wrong. Now the fourth one, perichondroblast promote the growth of cartilage. Now based on this information, you have to select the correct answer for this question is, what are the statements regarding the grizzle? The third one, that is the first option correct, second option correct, and the fourth option also correct. Now we go for the next question. Assertion, only elastic cartilage exhibits high degree of resilience. Now as we observe the elastic cartilage, that is the second type of cartilage. This is the only cartilage having the collagen and elastin fibers. Now, what is the assertion? Only elastic cartilage exhibits a high degree of resilience. 100% correct. On what basis? Because it has elastic yellow fibers. Now, what is the reason? Elastic cartilage is the only type of cartilage which contains elastic fibers. They are made by elastin fibers. So, by this information, you have to identify the correct answer. Both A and R are correct. R explains A. Now go for the next question. Again a assertion. Fibrous cartilage is the strongest and least flexible of all types of cartilages. Now as we observe the fibrous cartilage, no doubt the fibrous cartilage is the strongest cartilage. Why it is called the strongest cartilage? Because it has dense white collagen fibers. Because of the presence of the collagen fibers, the cells number also very less. Because of the presence of the dense collagen fibers, it is the strongest cartilage. Now assertion, Fibrous cartilage is the strongest and least flexible of all types of cartilages because more and more number of white collagen fibers are present. Now go for the reason. Fibrous cartilage consisting of very large number of bundles of collagen fibers in the matrix, but elastic fibers are absent. Now you have to guess the answer for this question is. Now the answer 1 is the correct answer. A and R are correct. R explains A. Now go for the next question. Hyaline cartilage which is ensheathed by perichondrium. Hyaline cartilage which is not ensheathed by perichondrium. Now I am giving some information regarding the hyaline cartilage. Where hyaline cartilage is present in the tip of the nose and in the trachea and in the C-shaped rings and in the larynx and on the ventral side of ribs and in the cyclostomes cartilage fishes, the endoskeleton at all stages made by hyaline cartilage and in the long bones. This part we call it as epiphysis. Around epiphysis hyaline cartilage present. In the hyaline cartilage there is no perichondrium. The hyaline cartilage around epiphysis is called articular cartilage. In the articular cartilage no perichondrium. On the ventral side of rib what is present? Hyaline cartilage called costal cartilage. In the costal cartilage what is absent? The perichondrium absent. Now based on this information you have to identify the correct answer for this question. One option costal cartilage, second one articular cartilage, third one cartilage of the nasal septum, and the fourth one is cartilage of embryonic skeleton of vertebrates. Third is eliminated, fourth that is eliminated. Now you have to guess the correct answer for this question. The appropriate answer for this question is articular cartilage, though the costal cartilage is also correct. If two options are giving separately, in these two options what is the best option? The articular cartilage, though the first one is also correct. Now we go for the next question. Two nearby aversion canals of a bone are connected by, or the aversion canals of osteon are connected by. Already we discussed this one. In the diaphysis or shaft marrow cavity is present. Parallel to the marrow cavity what are present? The aversion canals. How the aversion canals are arranged longitudinally? All aversion canals are connected by a transverse canal, that we call it as Walkman canal. What is the other name of osteon aversion system? Now you have to identify the answer. Circles of lacunae, bone lamellae, Walkman canals and canaliculi. Now here what is the correct answer you have to identify for this question is, what is the transverse canal that connects the longitudinal aversion canals is the Walkman canal. Now go for the next question. Common character of bone and cartilage with reference to their matrix. As we observe the cartilage and bone, in the matrix empty spaces are present. The empty spaces are called lacunae. In the cartilage, in the lacunae, what is present? Chondroblast. Whereas in the bone matrix, in the lacuna, what is present? Osteoblast. Now you observe lamellae, supply of blood vessels, canaliculi, lacunae, lamellae associated with bone, highest blood supply associated with bone, canaliculi associated with the bone. What is the last option associated with the both the characters? That we call it as lacunae. Now you have to identify the correct answer for this question is the fourth option, that is lacunae. That means empty space where the matrix absent. Now we go for the next question. The following are the statements about osseous tissue. In brackets, what is the other name of osseous tissue? The bone. Now don't go for the statements. Below statements what they asked, which of these statements are correct regarding the bone? Now we are going to get the correct answer. Now you have to read the first statement. Bones formed from the cartilage are replacing bones. No doubt in the embryonic stage hyaline cartilage present. As development is going on, the hyaline cartilage undergoes ossification and becomes a bone. Such type of bone derived from the hyaline cartilage we call it as replacing bone or cartilage bone or endochondral bone. Whereas during the development, the connective tissue of mesenchyme undergoes ossification and the bone develops. Such type of bone we call it as dermal bone. Such type of bone we call it as dermal bone. Now carefully you have to observe the statements. Bones formed from the cartilage are replacing bones. 100% it is correct statement. Now the second one. The bones directly formed from the mesenchyme or cartilage bones, that is the wrong. The bones derived from the mesenchyme are called dermal bones or membrane bones. But here they gave the cartilage bones, that is the wrong statement. What is the second one? The third one, the bones of cranium. As we observe the cranium, in the skull one part we call it as cranium. The cranium is called the brain box. It provides protection to the brain. The cranium has what type of bones? The flat bones. Now you have to identify the correct answer based on this information is. The answer is 2. First option and the third option. We discuss the remaining in the next class.